Previously, on the story of Western philosophy, Thales brought the world out of mythology with a single question. What is the arche? What is the fundamental, unchanging basis of reality? He taught three students, the rationalistic genius Anaximander, the synthesis bad boy Anaximenes, and the one destined to outshine them all, Pythagoras. Pythagoras once said about Pythagoras, there are men and gods and beings like Pythagoras. Who, and perhaps more importantly, what was Pythagoras? Pythagoras, to the average viewer, is the man responsible for the childhood trauma of trying to solve the Pythagorean theorem while your stepdad Kevin screams at you because you don't understand what's going on. To the philosophy student, he's the weird cult leader who wouldn't eat beans because they looked like testicles, or maybe the gates to hell. But to people of his day, he was the son of Apollo. Wow, that's a pretty hefty claim. The challenging thing about Pythagoras is that he's shrouded in mystery and myth. There are no surviving authenticated writings of his, just a bunch of contradictory and oftentimes absurd tales. One moment Aristotle is telling us about Pythagoras' mathematical genius, and the next he's telling us about the time he was bitten by a venomous snake. So he bit it back, killing it. To truly understand this sort of polymath genius, we must first understand the ancient Greek cults that existed before him. The year is 6000 BC. Dionysus is the talk of the town, the god of wine and ecstasy. Depictions of individuals participating in the Dionysian mysteries often involved the drinking of wine, phallic symbolism, half animal, half humans, and participating in orgiastic revelries, basically ancient furry porn. However, all this begs the question of what kind of wine gives you that sort of trip. They couldn't distill wine to the extent they do today. It would have given them a light buzz at most. Some postulate that it was a psychedelic wine. It has recently bin confirmed that the initiates of the Eleusinian mystery cult that worship Demeter would partake of a psychedelic beer, so I don't think it's much of a stretch to assume the Dionysian mysteries involved something similar. From the Dionysian mysteries evolved Orphism. The central Orphic myth is about the time when the infant Dionysus was killed and consumed by the Titans. In retribution, Zeus strikes the Titans with a thunderbolt, turning them into ash. From these ashes, man is born. In Orphic belief, the mystery describes humanity as having a dual nature, a body inherited from the Titans and a divine soul inherited from Dionysus. In order to achieve salvation from the titanic material existence, one had to be initiated into the Dionysian mysteries and undergo ritual purification and reliving of the suffering and death of the god. If initiated, they would have a positive afterlife for eternity. If uninitiated, they would be reincarnated for eternity. Men born of sin, a god that dies and rises again, a sacred sacrament of wine. Sounds awfully familiar. That's a foreshadowing. In order to maintain their purity following initiation, Orphics attempted to live an ascetic life, most notably by adhering to a strict vegetarian diet that also excluded broad beans. This asceticism, which means the rejection of primal titanic urges, appears very different from the previous ecstasy of the Dionysian mysteries. Orphism is named after the poet, hero, and religious leader Orpheus, who is said to be the son of Apollo. So in essence, we shift from the worship of Dionysus to the worship of Apollo and Dionysus. We'll circle back to this evolution of cultish ideas later. This sets the stage. So back to Pythagoras. Apollo does what the Greek gods do best. Pythagoras is mom, and Pythagoras is born in Samos. However, he didn't like how his city was run, so he hit the road and went to Egypt. From there, he traveled to Miletus and learned from Thales and became buds with Anaximenes. From there, he moved to Croton. Somewhere throughout these journeys, he likely was initiated into the Orphic mysteries. So in Croton, Pythagoras, this well-traveled man with a fascination for both the philosophic and mythological, decides to start up a cult, which philosophers should definitely do more often. And for a quality cult, if you don't have psychedelics, you need a radical new philosophy. So Pythagoras stepped up to bat to answer the burning question driving the philosophical discourse. What is the arche? What is the fundamental basis of reality? And what does our young eclectic cult leader reply with? All things are numbers. Name a more elegant vision in the search for truth. The equation 2 + 2 = 4 is irrefutable. However, for Pythagoras, the belief that all things are numbers was not only the belief in a perfect and exact truth, but also in a supersensible, intelligible world. For him, this mathematical idealism and the apparent world were one. And this realization, this Pythagorean movement, led to a philosophical, theological, technological, and aesthetic revolution. People began searching for the perfect mathematical ratios and sculptures, proportions that captured the utmost beauty. Pythagoras realized the mathematical nature of music and the existence of harmonic progression. He even believed that the planets and the stars moved according to mathematical equations, which correspond to musical notes and thus produce an inaudible symphony. Everything was numbers. The excitement in the air was palpable. Pythagoras' philosophy was the realization of Apollonian beauty being brought to fruition. At first, the idea that Pythagoras was thought to be the son of Apollo by many seems like a silly factoid, primitive delusions. But when you consider his philosophy in conjunction with Orphic myth, it becomes poetic. Apollo was the god of music and truth, and Pythagoreanism is the belief in a harmonious, intelligible world. This mathematical addition to the Orphic tradition is an evolution comparable to Orpheus himself, and so Pythagoras, like Orpheus before him, is deemed the son of Apollo. This Orphic connection can explain many of the weird stories about Pythagoras, like the time he descended to Hades and returned, or when it was discovered that he had a golden thigh, something that for the Pythagoreans was symbolic of the ritualistic descent and return from Hades, a purification process. Now let's go through the specifics of Pythagoras' cult. Pythagoras believed in metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls after death, basically reincarnation. He was said to preach to animals as well as to man. According to many accounts, he was like the super vegan of antiquity, against even the use of oxen or rams to plow fields, let alone consuming meat, and adamantly against eating all beans, not just the broad ones, except according to one source for the time he discovered the Pythagorean theorem. Then, out of sheer joy, he grabbed a helpless porker and sacrificed it to the gods. The soul of man, he says, is divided into three parts: mind, reason, and passion. Now, mind and passion are presented in other animals as well, but man alone possesses reason. The reasoning part is immortal, and others are mortal. When asked when it was appropriate to have sex, he replied, "Whenever you want to become weaker." Radical asceticism, the rejection of passion to focus on reason. Here are just a few of the rules Pythagoras made for his followers. Do not pick up what has fallen. Do not touch a white cock. Do not eat the heart. Do not walk on highways. Do not let swallows share one's roof. Men as well as women were welcome to be his followers, and they all lived communally. All involved were sworn to secrecy, and those who were poets were strictly banned. Basically, life was good for Pythagoras. He'd cracked the code and set his followers on a path to understanding the language of the universe, mathematics, and he was a demigod amongst men, until one day he went on a fishing trip with a fellow mathematician, and that mathematician presented him with the reality of irrational numbers. The perfection of Pythagoras' comprehensible, harmonious world was shattered. In denial, Pythagoras drowns the guy to death. After that, he began to spiral, making outlandish claims like that the earth was a sphere. At last, in his old age, when the citizens of Agrigentum and Syracuse were at war, Pythagoras went out with his followers and fought in the front ranks for the Agrigentines. The Syracuse troops put the Agrigentines to flight, and Pythagoras found himself trapped between an army of soldiers and a bean field. All his friends went running through the bean field, leaving him standing behind, standing for what he believed in. The Syracuse killed him that day, but his legacy and his school lived on. Pythagoras, in my opinion, is one of the most influential people of all time. His philosophy went on to influence Plato, and through Plato, all of mainstream philosophy. But his life didn't only impact philosophy, it impacted mathematics, physics, sculpture, music. Through the Pythagoreans' technology, the tides of war, theology, it even infiltrated the underground world of Hermetic philosophy, alchemy, and the Islamic world, specifically Sufism, and most importantly, me. May fathers always shed tears with their sons as they recount the tales of Pythagoras. And with that, our chapter comes to an end. Join me next time to discuss the philosophy and life of Heraclitus, a man who will radically challenge the very founding question of the philosophic discussion.